Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Pro Video Pages webinar series. Joining me today is Linda Wesley of StoryPath Communications. Welcome, Linda.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Anne.
Of course. Our webinar topic today is one that many haven't looked at in the way that Linda's going to look at it. We can all agree that communication is at the heart of our businesses, but have you taken the time to make sure that your messaging is clear, consistent, and on brand? Linda's topic today focuses on how to create a communications plan. Linda, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a topic that I am so passionate about, and so I'm excited to be here sharing it with you today. Just a quick intro for myself. My name is Linda Wesley, and my company is StoryPath Communications, and I help small businesses and nonprofits get clarity around their message. And I'm excited to share this topic. I'm going to talk through a lot today, take some notes, and we'll wrap it up at the end and try to give you a really clear path forward for how to create a communications plan. So first of all, what is a communications plan, right? That's not a term that a lot of people have heard. So for my definition, a communications plan is really all about helping you be clear, concise, and consistent with your message. Small businesses have a lot going on, right? We're wearing a lot of hats, we're juggling a lot of things, and we're just trying to keep everything on track. Communications plan is really about that clarity of message, but also about creating a roadmap for your business. Where are you going? How are you going to get there? You want to set some specific destinations in that communications plan. You want the direction you're headed. You want to have that plan, that outline for how to get there. And in reality, you're going to hit a few detours along the way, but a communications plan is what helps you get back on track, keeps you focused on that goal. Another thing I like to tell people about a communications plan is that it's a living, breathing document. It's not something that you finish and you check off a list and you shove it in a drawer and you never look at it again, right? It's a strategy document. It's something intended to guide your business and guide the direction you're going and give you that anchor point to come back to. So I want to talk for a minute about it in terms of art. So abstract art, it's beautiful. I love looking at abstract art and thinking about it. But if you were taking, let's say you're not an artist and you're taking a bunch of colors and you're just throwing some paint at a canvas, you might end up with something that looks like this, looks like what's on the screen. It's beautiful. It's vibrant. You may have had a little bit of a plan when you started for what colors were going to go where, what range of colors you were going to use. But when you're finished, it's really open to interpretation. What I see in this art might be different from what Anne sees, might be different from what you see. So there's that interpretation that's left, right? Whereas if you go in with a plan, let's say it's a paint by number, or that you've purchased, or it's something that you have a vision and you sketch it out and you know what colors you're going to put where very specifically, and you know what message you're trying to communicate through that art, you use those same basic colors and you get something that looks more like this. There's certainly still room for interpretation in all art, of course, right? But we can all see that this painting has some boats that are on the water. So again, similar colors, but a different use. And so that's really what I think is most critical about having a communications plan for your business, is that when you are then putting out messages about your business, whether you're talking to someone or they're on your website or they're on social media or some other channel, there's the clarity and the consistency that most people are walking away with a good understanding of that message you've tried to share. So let's talk a little bit more about what's involved in a communications plan. And really, there's some key questions that every communications plan is going to answer. If you can think back to perhaps elementary school, maybe it was middle school, somewhere along the way, you might have learned the 5 W's and an H. So that might have come up in a writing exercise. Sometimes it's used in creative writing. It's certainly used in more journalism type writing, but it's also used in event planning and invitations. And so you have to tell people the who, what, when, where, why, and how. I usually rattle those off a lot faster because it's just so ingrained, I think, with my background in journalism and in some event planning as well. So the who, what, when, where, why, and how. But when it comes to your communications plan, most people, I think, start with the who. That's at least how I always learned it. But when it comes to your communications plan, you're actually going to start with the why. It's so important. The why is so important. Why do you need to communicate? Why are you in business? That's a big question, right? So we want to start with the why. And then you'll also notice that the how comes a little before the when. So what do each of these areas mean? This basically becomes the template outline for the sections of your communications plan. Why is your business goals. Who, your audience, of course, who you're trying to reach. Your what is what I call key messages. Where is your channel? So those are the ways that you communicate about your business. We'll get into those and all the rest of this, of course. How is your action steps? How are you going to do it? How are you going to reach that audience with those key messages through those channels? And when, of course, is your timeline? Obviously, thinking back to we're small business owners, there's a lot going on, and we have to be realistic about those timelines, of course. So that's the outline of what's going to be in your communications plan. And I want to point out that top row, the why, the who, and the what, that has to be where you start. None of the stuff on the bottom matters if you have not defined your why, you haven't defined your who, and you haven't really gotten clarity around your what. So many times, small business owners jump in of, oh, we got to start social media, or we're going to do this thing, or there's this trade show opportunity, or there's an advertising opportunity for me. And they jump in and they kind of get that shiny object syndrome, but they haven't really clarified their business goals, their audience, and their key messages, which means all of those other things you're doing may not have as much impact. They may not be as effective because you don't have clarity around that top row of these questions and these pieces. So let's jump in a little bit to each of these areas. I'm going to give you some guiding questions on the slide around how you can think about these areas and how you can start to take some notes for your business and work toward creating a communication plan. And I'm going to talk a little bit more, obviously, than what's on the slides, try to share some examples from some of my experience where I can that might help bring some of this to life for you. So the why. These are your business goals. Why are you in business? Where are you now? Where are you headed next? Who are you trying to reach? What are you struggling with? You want to capture your business goals. Now, this is not full scope business strategic planning. Hopefully you've done that in a separate forum, in a separate way, but you want to make sure that your communications plan does capture something of your business goals so you have that reference point in this plan. One example of this is I talked to a business owner at one point about some of their social media strategy and the messages they were using online and how they were communicating. And they really felt like they needed to be doing more than they were currently doing. But they had also hit capacity for clients. They really didn't have time to take on any other clients. And they were also starting to really think about retiring from their business in the next couple of years. So that's where those business goals come in and how this anchors you to what's going to be in your communications plan. They didn't need a goal to grow their business necessarily. Their goal was more focused on exiting their business in the next couple of years. And that changes their approach. And that's why the business goals matter. That's why you want to start with that why and start with those goals. So let's talk about the audience now. This is the who. You've probably heard it said that you need to define your audience. Your audience isn't everyone. You don't want to try to reach everyone because not everyone is the right fit for your services, your product, and what you have to offer. So who are they? Who is your audience? There's two ways you can break this down. You can look at demographics and you can look at psychographics. So demographics would be things like age, gender, income level, where they live, what's their profession, what sort of business are they in if you're B2B. So if you're business to business offering services or if you're business to consumer, some organizations are both. So if you're both, you need to define each of those audiences. So you may have direct client audiences, and then you may also have like referral partner audiences, right? We're all working with each other, we're networking, we're referring. So you need to factor in those referral partners as well. What's their company size? What's their revenue? Where are they located? What's their industry? You just want to capture a little bit of a snapshot of who the people are, who you're trying to reach, so that you can get clarity around that and stay true to that. And that also helps kind of avoid that shiny object syndrome. You're not chasing after audiences that really aren't the right fit for you. Now, the big question is what matters to them, right? And that's sometimes a hard question to answer. How do you know who they are? How do you know what matters to them? And then I always like to ask it too is, where's their pain and what pain do you solve? Those two questions, the what matters and where's their pain, there's a wide range of possibilities for how you could answer that based on what your business is and what you're offering. But think about your past clients and customers. Sit down, spend some time thinking about who you've helped. What do they have in common? What have they told you is an issue for them? What do your testimonials say about the relief you've provided or the clarity you've provided to your customers? How have you helped? So think about your past clients and customers. If you have employees, ask your employees, make this a brainstorm activity. Ask your audiences, ask your customers, why do you choose us? Why do you keep coming back? You can research, like on the demographic side of things, of course, you can research your area, you can research your general audiences and get a better idea of who they are. So this does not need to be a super in-depth research project, but you do want to try to get points of input outside of your own head, if that makes sense. You don't want to just make assumptions based on your experience. You want to try to talk to other people, gather some of that. One example here with audience and why it matters and why it plays into your communications plan as a whole. I worked with a dental office who they have a lot of data. They have data around the age of their patients. They had some knowledge of who they were. They usually captured what sort of work they did, because sometimes that can affect some things with your health and your teeth. But so they had a lot of demographic data about their patients. And then they also had data around the services that their patients were using. And we were able to take that data and say, okay, here's who you're currently serving. Does this line up with who you'd like to be serving? And for them, it didn't. There was a little bit of a disconnect. They wanted to shift who they were serving, and they wanted to shift the services that they were selling the most, or that they were providing the most. They wanted to get into some more cosmetic dentistry. And so that all played a role of looking at who their audience was, and then looking at who did they want their audience to be, and how did we need to shift their messaging to meet that. One other thing you can do with audience is audience personas. Some people call these avatars. And so if you have 3 or 4 different audiences and that you're serving, and you're trying to keep them straight, maybe you're trying to keep your team kind of all on the same track around those audiences, give them a name and a face. Find a stock photo, use an AI image generator, if that makes sense, to create an actual photo of a person that aligns with who that is. So then you're sitting in a meeting. Let's say that you're a small business that's targeting single moms, that you have a service to offer to single moms. Then you're talking about Stephanie. You're not just saying, well, when we're helping single moms. It brings a little bit of personality to it to say, we're helping Stephanie today, and this is our focus. But if you have multiple audiences, you can say, well, this piece of communication is focused to Stephanie and people like Stephanie, or this piece of communication is focused to Derek and people like Derek. So you have options to sort of personalize that audience piece. So let's move on to key messages. Let's talk about that what. This is how you talk about yourself. This is honestly one of the most important parts of your communications plan, because that's where you get clarity to flow through to everything else. So sit down and think about, what do you need your audience to know about your business? And then also think about what matters most to your audience. Hopefully those two things align. Sometimes there's a little bit of disconnect, and you have to work with that, and you have to create messages that fit with what you need them to know, but also fit with what they're most concerned about. And then one of the questions I really like to ask, again, if you have a team, is everyone telling the same story? So the goal here in key messages is to get to the point where you have around 5, I would say, absolute minimum of 3, maximum of 7 key messages that you have written. So these are bullet point statements. They're not super long, but they encapsulate what's most important for you to share about your audience. And it's not about creating trained parrots that are all going to say the exact same thing. Let's say you have a staff of 10. It's not about making sure that all 10 of those people just wrote, memorize, and repeat the same exact messages when they're out talking to people. But it is about making sure there's consistency in that message. And if you start from the same place and you start with that clarity, as people personalize those messages a little bit, whereas that message gets passed from one person to another, you keep a little bit more clarity. So if you remember the game of telephone, I don't know if you played telephone when you were a kid, but it was this game where somebody whispered something in the first person's ear, and then you could only whisper it once and you passed it down the line, right? And if you went through 10 people, what you ended up with sounded nothing like what you started with. I actually played this game with my nieces and nephews not too long ago, and I'm pretty sure there was some intentional changing of a message on the way at this point. But you can think about, how does that message dilute down the road? So it's really important that you consistently have that same message and that your team has that same message, because then as it's shared, there's less dilution down the road. So that's where the consistency really comes into play. So let's talk about communications channels. I call them channels. Other people, I'm certain, use other words, but these are things like your website, your social media, print, if you're using print advertising of any kind, email marketing, video, which we all know is a very powerful channel, of course, word of mouth. So that's referral network. That's when people are talking about you. Some businesses, media is a channel that is important. So think a little bit about, what channels are you currently using? Do they make sense? Are they channels where your audience is? Most everybody's going to have a website. Email marketing is one that I think gets underused a lot for businesses, for small businesses in particular. Video, again, super powerful. Word of mouth is also one where people sometimes think, oh, well, word of mouth just happens. But there are a lot of ways you can actually encourage word of mouth and be strategic about it. So think through where you are now in social media, break it down. Which social media platforms are you on? Is your audience on those platforms? Do you have the time to keep up with those platforms? That's a huge factor when it comes to social media. So the channels section of your website, the channels section of your communications plan is not super detailed. It's basically a bulleted list of where do you exist. And it's just something that you can think through and flow through the rest of your plan and think, as you write action items, which channels are these action items going to impact? One thing I always like to say for social media is that you don't have to be on every single social media platform. And you don't have to do something just because your competitor is doing it. You need to think through your key messages, your audience, where are they, and what's your capacity? So find what works for you when it comes to those communication channels. So that is the introductory part of a communications plan. Again, the channels is usually a pretty quick exercise. Those other 3 areas are really, really critical. So spend a decent amount of time on those if you're writing a plan. And then we get into the action items. What are you going to do about this information? You've started with your business goals, you've identified your audience, you've identified your message and your channels. So then it becomes the how. How do you get your message to your audience through those channels? And so these action items are very specific to you. This is where the roadmap really comes into play, the tasks that are going to move you forward. And as best as you can, tie an action item to your goals, to your audience, and to your channels. So you may have an action item that's exclusive to one channel. Perhaps it's time for a website redesign, right? That's a very specific website channel action item, but it's applicable to all of your audiences. You may have a outreach campaign that's designed to encourage word of mouth that's specific to one audience only. And so as you go through and you write some action items, try to capture, just in some quick bullet points, this is the audience that's impacted by this action item. This is the channel that's impacted by this action item. I also recommend that you consider budget and know, what do you need to make that happen? Is it resources for some outside help? Is it a budget resource that you just, for printing? So think through budget as well as you can. I also like to remind people to be realistic about their action items. Um, we're business owners. We're wearing all those hats. We have all of the things in the air all at one time. So you don't want to write a communications plan with action items that you're somehow going to all accomplish in 3 months, right? List them in order of priority and then put a timeline on them. So that's where the win comes in, right? Put a timeline. When are you going to start that project? When are you going to aim to finish that project? That can help keep you on track. And again, be realistic. That's one of the things, you don't want to aim too high. Obviously we all want to improve. We all want to make a difference in our businesses, but you don't want to write a plan that's not feasible to implement. So really spend some time thinking about what are the things you need to do, what items are most critical, what are the timelines that are reasonable to complete those identified action items. And then we actually circle back to why. So you started with business goals and you started with that why. And as you write a communications plan, you also want to include some level of measurement in that plan. How will you measure if the time, effort, budget that you put into all of this is making a difference for your business? And you want to be able to evaluate your success and you want to adjust accordingly. So evaluation, pull the metrics that you have. You have revenue numbers for your business. You have social media engagement. You have email opens and clicks, video view. You may not have all of those, but pull the numbers that you do have, set those sort of as a baseline as you develop a communications plan, and then monitor them as you go along and see, what is making an impact in your business as you get more clear about your message and you get more clear around your audience. You'll have some hard numbers that I mentioned. You're also going to have some soft data when it comes to measurement, right? Not everything is a hard and fast number. So if one of the things you're starting with is that you have some confusion among some of your customers about what you offer, and part of your goal for this is to get more clarity around your message and be more consistent, if you start seeing that confusion lessen among your customers, then that's something to measure as well. Again, it can be a little harder to quantify, but it's something to think about in sort of a soft data point for measurement as well. So let's wrap this up a little bit and just take a look again about these 6 areas. So your business goals, your audience, your key messages, your channels, your action steps, and your timeline. I know that's a lot of information I just threw your way, but go back and watch it again if there's an area that you need to dive into a little bit more. And if this is something that you're ready to tackle in your business, if you're struggling with clarity around your message, if you're struggling to be consistent across your channels, and this is something you want to spend the time on, I really encourage you to block some time. I recommend several different blocks of time. Block about 2 hours at a time and try to get yourself 3, maybe 4 sessions to complete this work. Your first session, you may honestly just be gathering all of your material together. You may be pulling prep pieces so that you can look at all of it together, looking at your website. So your first session may just be gathering and getting set up. And then you spend a session getting into your business goals and your audience. So block that time, think through the questions, get your thoughts on paper, and refine as needed as you go. But this is not you're going to sit down and knock it out in an hour. I promise. Spend some time thinking about your why, then get into the rest of the question, but make sure you're starting with those business goals. And again, a couple of other reminders. Don't try to be everything to everyone. Like, really identify your audiences and focus on your core audience. And then most important, be consistent and be authentic. If you're consistent and you're authentic, both of those things are going to go a really long way to clarity of your message overall. And remember, this is an ongoing document. So in reality, it's never really done. You will hit a point that you have mostly a final draft. But as your business changes, some things about your communications plan are going to change. It's okay to go edit it. It's okay to review it 3 months, 6 months down the road and make some changes. You want to give the action items you're trying time to work, of course, but you also want to just assess what's happening in your business, assess what's happening with your communications plan, and adjust if needed. Don't check it off a list and shove it in a drawer. That's what I always tell everybody. Make sure that this communications plan becomes the guiding document for your business. Like, it can really help you keep that clarity, keep on track, keep everybody on the same page as you move forward. So that is all I have today. Thanks so much, Anne, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You are so, thank you. Oh my gosh. We've talked about this topic, and I just want to say this is so much more. And I'm so excited about this. This is the vision that I have for this series, to provide practical marketing and business education so that people can take action on their own. And Linda, you have really outlined that so clearly. A couple of points I wanted to make. First of all, I love that you put the three things first: the why, the who, and the what, because those are so important. And if you don't have those, even if you're in the right channel and you know where they're hanging out, so to speak, if your message isn't clear, it's going to miss the mark. And secondly, this is really like marketing strategy. We talked about that. And I would actually go so far as to say, if to the business owner, if you don't have a budget and you've never done a marketing strategy before, I would actually start with this communication strategy. Do it the way Linda's talking about, because you're going to basically shift your thinking into a strategic approach to your business. Take the time. This is, like she said, this is not just an hour, which is, I'm like, oh, I'd love to just get this done. But no, it's actually, sometimes it's hard for us business owners to look internally and slow down, to take the time to rest in some of these things, whether it's the personas or the messaging or the five, anywhere from 3 to 7 key messages. There's just so much in here that's worth spending the time doing. It's investing in your business. And I really appreciate your approach on this. And it's really obvious, Linda, why I asked you to be one of the first to present in this series. And I thank you. I really appreciate your approach. And if you would like to connect with Linda, we'll have her information available below in the description. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope that you will come along this journey. We are going to have many more topics with practical advice for your business and education that you can put into practice on your own. So thank you, Linda, for joining me today.
Thank you.
If you found this valuable and you're thinking to yourself, I need to create some video content for my business, but I'm not confident I could pull it off professionally enough. That's literally what we help people with at Pro Video Pages. No pressure, but if you want to see how we make this ridiculously simple for busy professionals, just check out the link in the description and reach out.